Hello, everybody. This is episode 5 of the ICE Bath podcast. I'm delighted to welcome a good friend of mine, and Neil Whitbread, a former Scotland Yard detective, Met Police, and his company is called Sportive. So I'm going to hand over to Neil and let him fill you in on his background and what he does now, and then we're going to talk about sports due diligence, I think.
Cheers, Colin. Thank you very much. Obviously, delighted to be invited to join you this morning. As you said, I had 23-year career with the Met, going on to specialist, serious and organised crime,
Yeah,
specialist covert units. So lots of experience, like yourself around, that daily management of critical risk, handling highly sensitive intelligence, managing complex investigations and covert and confidential operations. Um, we launched Sportive earlier this year. It's an area, particularly in the football industry, I've had some insights into through my brother, who's a professional footballer.
right.
And it's something I've been working on and off for the last few years, sort of making relationships with people in football and particularly. But we, sort of identified there was potentially a gap in the market there for a kind of sports
Yeah.
specific due diligence intelligence investigations provider. That's us in a snapshot.
No, that's fascinating. 'Cause there's that saying, isn't there, about do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, I say that to people. If you could combine two things, are real passions of mine. It's investigation, as you know,
yeah,
and sports. I mean, more football, is probably my number one favorite. But I'm into all other sports as well.
yeah,
hopefully, you're getting up in the morning isn't such a chore when you're doing something you enjoy.
yeah. And you left the police. When did you sort of leave the job, as we call it?
So 2018,
Yeah,
I was fortunate, to be able to leave with a pension, but I was still quite young in,
yeah.
age wise. And if I'm being honest, I didn't have a plan in place.
Mm.
I
Should
knew,
do.
I knew very little about the outside world,
Yeah,
and it's been a steep learning curve in the last 7 years to sort of really learn about the corporate world and
yeah,
what investigation looks like in the corporate world and due diligence, particularly now.
yeah,
I've done sort of lots of projects and work globally on due diligence, in some really kind of challenging places like the Middle East and South America and North Africa, so forth, and at the
yeah,
Eastern Bloc.
yeah,
It's a change of kind of mindset. You're still using those core skills that we had
yeah,
as detectives, as investigators, and bringing all that experience and expertise, but into the corporate world. And it's a transition, and
mm.
some people are good at it, some people aren't so good at it.
Yeah,
Taking a little bit of time, but yeah, it's still still a fascinating world. And so the passion is still there for investigation and getting to the bottom of things.
yeah. It's problem solving as well, isn't it? And it's sort
Mm.
of giving answers to people. But yeah, I've been out 17 years, and you're right about that adaptation to the corporate world. I think we were both fortunate enough to go to an organisation where there were lots of ex-job people, but it's very sort of into the sort of corporate investigation side of things, and gave certainly gave me great exposure to that world and understanding that the needs are somewhat different and the wants don't
Yeah.
always align to policing what we're used to, but it did me good.
No, I totally agree. I mean, it is a different environment, but
Mm.
it's still all about communication,
Mm.
stakeholder engagement, as
Yeah,
you said, problem solving, planning, organization, all those kind of day-to-day skills. I mean, be honest, sometimes I look back and think I used to take all that for granted as
yeah,
all that training I had and that experience that, the scenarios I was exposed to.
yeah,
It's not until you sit down now, you look back and you think, oh God, yeah, I did that, and that was quite serious. I was managing,
yeah,
live firearms operations and threats to life and that kind of thing. That if you didn't act in the right way, it was critical. And
yeah,
now in the corporate world, yes, there are some critical scenarios as far as the circumstances are concerned, but it is a little bit, it's slightly different. As someone probably similar you experienced yourself once said to me, he said, the first question I'll say when everyone's kind of, getting a little bit panicky about something is someone going to get shot in the next 30
Yeah,
minutes? If they're
yeah,
not, well, we can sit down and
yeah,
we can talk through things and we'll
yeah.
get, we'll get to a rational solution, hopefully.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and I was going to say that nobody's going to die, are they, from a result of, well, there'd be something really, really badly going wrong if
Yeah,
that was the case. But yeah, and you go with the flow, don't you? And that experience you bring in, you just can't calculate it.
no.
So I know we're going to go and on to talk about something that sort of piqued both of our interests shortly, but perhaps I do due diligence in a slightly different space. You're sort of in that sort of football sports space. What value and what does due diligence mean in sport as compared to the corporate world then in terms of the particularly financial?
Yeah, it's interesting because due diligence is such a key term now that
Yeah,
is if you take the football industry,
yeah,
but every time there's talk about transfer assignment, the transfer window is fascinating, particularly towards the climax or the end of the last week and the last 24 hours.
yeah,
And you'll see your Sky Sports reporters, but articles on the BBC or whatever
yeah,
sports media outlet talking about, oh, they've done their due diligence or they're doing their due diligence. And the question for me is, well, what does that actually mean?
yeah,
Do people know what due diligence really means? Because if you go back historically, it's obviously a term that's always been associated to corporate business and particularly
yeah,
around the financial kind of risk side of things, looking at anti-money laundering,
yeah,
KYC, compliance risk. So how does that transcend itself into football? Um, and I it's the same kind of framework and protocols for me because if you're looking at a top end football club or even not so top end because there's still huge money that's spent on an investment. A player, that you're signing for millions of pounds is an investment. So to me, it's no different than if you're entering into a business partnership,
yeah,
wealth management, or if you're going to hire a CEO on a six-figure salary, you should be, if you're in the corporate world, you should be conducting your due diligence to look into make sure is there anything that we need to, are there any red flags? Is there
yeah,
anything we need to know that we're not currently aware of that's going to cause us a problem either financially or reputationally?
yeah.
And it's the same for football. You trying to think just sort of some of the players that have been signed this summer. I mean, Alexander Isak is the classic one.
Yeah.
Liverpool with the saga that was going on with Newcastle. I think something like 125 million pounds. It's not a small amount of money. So
No, cool.
yes, he's an established player in the Premier League. Yes, he's made that transition from Europe to the UK.
Yeah,
So, but Liverpool, I would know, would be doing their due diligence in the background. Okay, yes, we want to sign him because we know what he can do on a football pitch.
mm,
But what is it about him in the background? Because this is a huge amount of money. If we spend this
yeah,
and that transfer doesn't work, and to be honest, it quite often transfers don't work. The
yeah.
success rate isn't that high.
Great. No,
That's 125 million pounds you're not going to get back. So it's vitally important that you that due diligence. What does that actually mean? Who are you going to go out to get that information?
yeah,
What's your structure? What's your strategy?
yeah,
What tools are in your toolkit?
yeah,
What's your resources? And to say it shouldn't really be any different to the corporate world that you and I work
yeah.
in.
Yeah, and what strikes me from conversation we've had in the past is that and we know this from experience about there's only so much you can do online. There's only so many databases you can go to. Sometimes you've got to put boots on the ground because the sort of stuff you're looking for, the sort of information and narrative you're looking for is only going to be between human and human. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily going to be posted online. So what's your sense about that person? Are they committed? Are they motivated? Because you can go to somebody's Facebook profile, LinkedIn profile, they write that themselves. They're not going to say they've got problems. So yeah, it's that additional layer, the due diligence. I think that you bring in with those sources you've got and your connections in your network that really adds the value. And it's a risk management process at the end of the day, as you said.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think one thing I've sort of learned from working in the corporate world, and it was something I did in law enforcement.
Mm.
Always. you're using different stakeholder partners to
Yeah.
conduct the work, whether it's, your covert technical unit, whether it's firearms teams,
Yeah.
intel units. You start developing your network of people, and the
Yeah.
people you can go to get the answers, because you won't know the answers all the time yourself.
Yeah.
None of us do, although some people out there always proclaim to be the experts of everything. But
Plenty
you
of
know,
them.
yeah, so it's knowing, okay, well, if I don't know the answer to this, and I adopt this exactly the same nowadays, with
Yeah.
what I do. If I don't know the answer, or I'm not too sure, who do I know that will give me the answer, or
Yeah.
can help me, or help the client I'm working with?
Yeah.
And I've LinkedIn has been a great way of utilizing
Mm.
network development, network
Yeah.
connections, but it's the value and being able to know I've got the right people out there, that if I
Yeah.
need to go and ask them,
Yeah.
how, for example, if we were looking at a football player in Chile,
Yeah.
who's in my network, I know Chile as a country. I've never been there.
Yeah.
I know it's Latin America. I know it's South American culture, but I don't, I haven't got any experience of what the culture is like there,
Yeah.
how the people are, how you go about doing things, what the risks are on the ground.
Yeah.
Who do I go to that
Yeah.
I know can either do that work for me, or give me the answers and explain to me, Neil, this is what you need to consider. This is
Yeah.
what the approach is, and that's just the value of having good people, as we all know, wrapped around you.
Absolutely. You can't put a price on a good network. And you and I have spoken on many times on various bits and bobs, but beyond that, we've got our own networks. And I work very much on that basis, that I pull in trusted sort of people as and when I need them. But yeah, and I would say the one thing if I miss anything from the job in terms of investigations, it's the tools that you can't get access to, the closed source information that made your job a little bit easier. But on the flip side to that, I think it makes you work that little bit harder when you haven't got access to them.
It's been one of the big learning things for me, is, as you said, as a detective working on the highest echelon of
Mm.
crime investigation, targeting the top tier criminals. You're
Yeah,
using every available asset,
yeah,
lawful asset
yeah,
and lawful resource you can. And yeah, you get access to things like intelligence systems,
yeah,
criminal convictions, things like ANPR.
yeah,
Yes, contacts with car hire firms. Okay, we believe our guy is hiring a car.
yeah,
Can you tell us the information about that? Yeah, you have to go through, obviously, justifying it, and it's all,
yeah,
proportionality, and
yeah,
asking for those requests legally. But you don't have that in the corporate world, so you have got to be a lot smarter.
yeah,
Um, I
definitely.
continue to say, with the teams that I've managed, are we using the best resources still? Are there things out there we need to keep our finger on the pulse about what's changing? Because particularly, and we've touched on this before with now AI
Yeah,
and different platforms, we can't stand still.
no, not
You
at all.
need to
Yeah,
continually be looking at what's out there and trying to test things. And there are some products that are arguably better than others, but there's such an advance, I think, on the tech side now, that
yeah,
it's almost like the weekly basis there's something new that someone's thinking of.
every
Uh,
day, every day.
it's really changing at pace.
But fundamentally, somebody put a post on about, you mentioned LinkedIn, about that term OSINT that I tend not to use very much, but about that it's not about the tools, it's about the investigative mindset. And you can't, you've got to be trained and have the experience to do that. So, but
Yeah.
yeah. Um, anyway, you drew my attention to a documentary, which is sort of I've watched, and I'll ask you to sort of talk about it in a minute, that really sort of drills down into, I think, what due diligence is all about in terms of preventing what was described on that documentary as financial abuse, which is not a term I've heard before, but it sums up what's happened. Do you want to talk about what the documentary, what it's called and what it was about?
Yeah, it's by it's documentary about footballers,
Yeah,
some very high profile names from maybe sort of few years ago, but certainly sort of players from the 90s,
yeah.
into the 2000s. BBC documentary. I got the name's
Like you
gone.
say, it's football's financial shame.
That's it.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I'd only watched it the other week.
No, no, no.
And yeah, it caught my eye because I love sort of
Yeah,
programs like that, and hearing sort of it's about investigation
yeah,
documentaries about what's gone on, and it was a real kind of eye opener to how easy it is
mm,
to put your trust and faith into people,
yeah,
and then as you said, be abused almost by that, and some significant players that have lost absolute fortunes,
yeah, yeah.
and some of them are completely broke and bankrupt, and
Bankrupt. Yeah,
through, I mean, they're honest guys, and they
yeah,
realize their mistakes, but I think it's easy for people to sit on the outside and judge and say, oh, well, you
yeah,
should have done this, should have done that. My brother is a former professional footballer, as I touched on, as you know, and you're relying, in that industry, you're relying, putting a lot of faith into people you trust, whether it's
yeah, yeah.
your representatives or whether it's people that are managing your finances, and because you just want to go and play football,
Of course you do.
and
Yeah,
I mean, I wasn't fortunate enough to play anywhere near that level, but I'd have been the same. You want to take the stresses away. That's why I'm having you kind of look after
yeah,
that, and yeah, it was a real sort of quite sobering
yeah,
program to see that how easy it was for people that were making significant, not like the money that footballers make today, but
no,
still
no, no,
significant income. But
yeah,
they lost that, and what people forget around footballers, they quite easily, is that it's not a 25-30 year career.
no, exactly that.
It's if you're lucky, if you get in a first team around about the age of 20, if you stay injury free, you might play to you're 31, 32, so 12 years,
Yeah,
and you've kind of worked hard to get that wealth, if you want to
yeah,
call it that,
yeah,
and then to find that you've been advised to invest in things like business plans and different money making schemes
yeah,
by supposedly reputable advisors,
yeah, yeah.
and the money's not there.
No, it was a hard watch in many ways. I mean, so some of those guys were elite players.
Yeah,
So Brian Dean, Dino, and
Rod Wallace.
Rob Wallace, who was
Yeah,
made bankrupt.
yeah.
It was so to and they were. I remember watching them when I lived in
Mm.
Leeds, and obviously policing the games as well. And
Yeah,
they were really good players who put the effort in. And there's a little bit in all this that the public sort of lack of sympathy, which I completely rail against, because you've touched on it there. They've only got a span of career, but the thing that you're right about the trust side of it, they put it in. You'd expect that, but it was a double whammy that really hit home for me, that they lost millions collectively through those investments. But then along come HMRC and say, you've now got to pay tax.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and then the other side of it, it was reported to the police as a fraud. It looked good from what we've only got the sort of documentary side of things. I don't know
yeah.
anything more than that. But then it wasn't pursued because there was a lack of evidence, which I found difficult to comprehend.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of people have made that comment to me because obviously, of, my background as an investigator. The
Mm.
first thing I always say, it's it's easy to kind of make observations if you haven't
Of course it
been
is.
part of
Yeah,
that investigation
yeah,
because you don't know.
yeah.
We don't know all the facts, but it does. I suppose as a layman, you kind of look at it thinking, okay, well, the way the program presented it, there was some key lines of inquiry and
Yeah,
it
yeah,
looked like on the face of it some key evidence, but
yeah,
why is that? But it's a very hard thing to kind of judge if you haven't been involved.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, the problem is as we both know, sometimes there's people, we've worked on teams where we want to push things forward and we're getting
yeah,
told from above, no, we've got to cut it off for whatever reason, and
yeah.
that can be frustrating. There may be other factors, going on. Could it be something as simple as people that are investigating and moved on to different things, and people come in and gone, seen it
Possibly.
differently?
Yeah,
It's a very hard one, but yeah, I mean, I sense their massive disappointment and their lack
mm,
of faith, I guess, like many people do at
yeah.
times, in
System.
the criminal
Yeah,
justice system.
yeah. I mean, if anybody, if anybody's watched it, then that they can comment in the on. But if you haven't watched it, it is well worth it to get an insight. And I'll pose you the question then. That was back in. This was all in the 90s, I believe, wasn't it?
Yeah,
So the internet as we know it now, really what, late 90s. And
yeah.
I do wonder, were, even if they were to instruct somebody to do some very basic due diligence, what they would have found anyway, because those sources probably, and the knowledge probably wasn't there. But it cuts right to the heart of sort of, and we've got to be careful here, haven't we? Because the company that advised them have said quite clearly that we've done nothing wrong. So, but how far could you go back then to find out anything about them as individuals? Things are a little bit different now, I think.
Well, I think you might. Yes and no. Yeah, I mean, yes, in that you can find out information is more readily available, and you've
Now,
got
yeah,
more, more companies or more people, like ourselves that can offer
yeah,
that service to
yeah,
get, find out, who is it you're actually partnering with.
yeah, yeah.
Are there any potential red flags? But the same kind of issues are still going on.
Hello.
I went to a really insightful event earlier this year, a football themed event. So Marcia Lewis, who's really doing some great
Oh, yeah,
stuff
yeah.
with Number One Fan Club. It was an event that she held, and her son, for those that don't know, is Miles Lewis Skelly, who's broken into the Arsenal first team and
Oh,
the
right, okay.
England
Yeah,
team this year. And it was very much, Marcia was highlighting the fact of agent representation, advisors,
oh,
who's got
right.
the best interest to look after young players, and where you've
Yeah,
got parents that are getting approached, because
yeah,
their kid is the next Wayne Rooney or the next Miles
yeah, yeah,
Skelly,
yeah.
who's reputable, who's going to look after them, who's going to go, and some really interesting, insightful panels and conversations. And I've had conversations with some of the
Mm,
people that were involved in the event since, and learning about, you talk about tax, and one
yeah,
of the key things that came out was potential misadvice around tax, and that player signs a new contract or
yeah.
signs for a club, the agent takes the fee, and there's no, the contract, kind of the way it's set up, the player isn't getting told that there's going to be a tax bill, and then at the end of 12 months, it's getting, and we talked to some of these are big transfers, gets
Mm,
hit with an HMRC tax bill that he had no idea was coming. And they were talking about the fact that, well, what about if this is a player that signs a contract and then gets injured,
mm,
and then
mm.
suddenly
Get swapped with a bill.
he's not receiving the income he was, so there's still a big area of
Yeah, yeah.
due diligence needed, and it's certainly something with Sportive we're looking to work on, not just working with clubs, but
Yeah, yeah. With
potentially
players as well.
with agents, advisors, and the players themselves. How can we help players
Yeah.
make better decisions? How can we support them and sort of help them with their due diligence before they commit to those kind of partnerships? Because it's still, there's still things happening out there.
No, that's really good. I mean, I suppose that's advocacy for them, because let's face it, there are kids that will come from, less privileged backgrounds, and then football is grassroots, isn't it? I mean,
Absolutely.
so and it's a sort of advice them and their parents would need. So that's really good, and it's like another form of due diligence,
Hmm.
I suppose. But that's great.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as you said, there's, I mean, my brother had a decent career,
Mm,
and he played in the era, some of those players in that documentary would have played against several
yeah,
of those, when
yeah,
he was at different clubs. But my parents were, working class
yeah,
people. Didn't come from any financial business
yeah,
advice,
no, yeah,
and to be honest, I mean, agents in those days, that was still starting to become a little bit of a new thing. But
mm,
even though I seem to recollect him talking some time ago about a similar thing around the BBC documentary about the investment in the film
yeah,
industry. That was a big thing that
yeah,
they were obviously really trying to smash into the football world, and get players to invest, because they could see the players were earning lots of money.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, young lads come from, as you said, the streets. The best players that
yeah,
ever came out of the game. Most of them come from, the streets,
yeah,
the estates, if
yeah,
you want to call it that. Um, and they're vulnerable.
Yeah.
But even players that come from different backgrounds, they still have the same vulnerabilities. When you look at the players on the BBC documentary, they weren't young kids. They were players that had just were
Established,
probably
weren't
early to mid-20s,
they?
were significant lights. And again, that's probably why they were targeted, because they knew they were
Yeah.
the players earning the big money. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just so important. Any of us, if you've got money or wealth and you're looking to invest it, and do your due diligence.
Yeah,
Simple as that.
exactly. Completely. And it's an intelligence function which we have known for many, many years is really important. Better information, better decisions. But no, that's been a fascinating chat. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. And how do people get in touch with you, Neil, should they want your services?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so there's no problem contacting me on
Yeah,
LinkedIn. But if not, email neil@sportactive.com.
yeah,
If anyone wants, contact you, you've got my contact
yeah,
details. So
yeah,
always happy to take an inquiry or phone call or anything like that. We don't charge for initial advice.
yeah.
Um,
Brilliant.
like I said sort of earlier in the call, if we haven't got the right people in place, or we can't give you the right advice, but we've got a raft of
Yeah,
contacts and partnerships, and
yeah,
and whether it's I'm looking to invest, so we're not financial advisors, but
yeah,
we can point you in the right direction
brilliant.
of people. But we have relationships like you and I.
Yeah,
We can always find the right answer for someone, but it may be that we have to go out
yeah,
to one of our partners, and so forth. But yeah, it's always happy to
yeah.
take an inquiry.
It's a much needed service. No, great. Well, thank you for coming along, and
No
I'm
problem at
sure
all.
it's going to be really interesting to listeners as well.
Perfect. Let's hope so.